Chapter 7. The dawn of the new day crept silently into the forest. The brownie fires had burned low when Rule tiptoed through the trees, carrying a sack of glittering dust. He sprinkled some of the dust onto the lovely eyes of the sleeping fairy, just as Frangine came up behind him. "Where'd you steal that dust of broken heart?" Frangine demanded. "Nowhere." Rule shrugged guiltily. "I was just having fun." "It belongs to the fairies," Frangine snapped. "It's dangerous. Give that to me." He tugged at the sack, sent Rule tumbling, and hooked it onto his own belt. The sleeping fairy stirred at the noise and sat up, rubbing her eyes. Seeing Frangine standing in front of her, she gave him a lovelorn grin, leaped up, and smothered him in a barrage of kisses. "Get away! Help!" Frangine bellowed. "Throw water on her!" Willow stepped past the thrashing brownies to Migash's side and whispered, "Wake up, Migash. It's time to go home." "Home?" Migash mumbled. He scrambled up with a sudden smile. "How's your arm?" Willow asked. "Think you'll be able to make it?" "Oh yeah, it's fine," Migash exclaimed. "Perfect. They put something on it." But he couldn't help rubbing it just the same, and Willow knew that he wasn't telling the whole truth. "Listen," Willow said slowly. "I want you to tell Kaya I love her, and I think of her every day." "Willow," Migash's smile faded, "and tell her I'm not going to let anything happen to the baby." "You've made up your mind?" Migash asked, staring at his friend. Willow nodded. "It's going to be dangerous, Willow. Maybe I should go with you." Willow shook his head. "Not with that arm, Migash. Give Mems and Rannon a hug for me, and don't let Kaya worry." "You sure you know what you're doing?" Migash said, frowning with concern. Willow shrugged. "I hope so." "Be careful." Migash put a hand on his friend's arm. "Daikinis say one thing and mean another." The two Nelwyns hugged each other in farewell, and Willow went on his way. Willow soon discovered that he had inherited the brownies Frangine and Rule as his guides. It was not an entirely happy arrangement, but it was better than wandering through the forest and the world beyond it completely alone. This way, Frangine shouted with his usual insufferable arrogance. Carrying the baby, Willow followed as patiently as he could. "Will it take long to find this Rizal?" Frangine shook his head. "Not long. She's been exiled to an island just over those hills," Rule said and pointed. "She's been what?" Willow stopped short. "By the evil queen Bavmoda," finished Rule. "Rule, you fool," hissed Frangine. "He doesn't need to know everything." "What are you saying?" Willow demanded. "What do you mean, island?" He shook Shalandria's wand at the brownies, who ducked. "Don't play with that," Frangine warned him. "Shalandria told you it holds vast powers. Only a great sorcerer can use it, not a stupid peck like you." A branch smacked Willow in the face, emphasizing the point. "Are you sure you know where you're going?" he said. "Of course," said Frangine. "With us as your guides, no harm will befall you." "Death below!" Rule suddenly shrieked in terror, pointing down the hill. Willow ran toward the edge of the trees. In the valley below, hundreds of Nockmar soldiers and cavalry were fighting the ragtag squad of rebel troops Willow had seen at the crossroads. Even from here he could hear the clash of weapons and the cries of dying men. "Daikinis," he murmured. The overpowered rebel troops were being forced up the hill toward their hiding place. Willow watched, hypnotized, until suddenly a sound made him spin around. Behind him was a troop of black-armored Nockmar soldiers. He crouched in the bushes, frozen with fear, as the hideous face of the Nockmar General Kale loomed above him. But Kale's attention was on the distant battle. "No mercy!" he roared. He lowered his ominous death mask over his face and spurred his horse down the hill, and the rest of the cavalry followed, closing the trap on the doomed rebels below. Willow and the brownies stumbled and scrambled for their lives, dodging horse after horse as the Nockmar reinforcements thundered by. Alora Dannon wailed and cried as Willow ran with her back through the forest, following the brownies, while behind them the Nockmar troops descended on the rebel squad and crushed them. "Shh! Don't cry, Alora," Willow murmured, his own voice unsteady as he huddled with her in the safety of the forest. "Things can't get any worse than this. Or could they?" A few hours later, Willow was trudging along a muddy road through the rain, trying in vain to keep Alora Dannon's head dry, and feeling utterly miserable. Up ahead, through the gray mist, he could see a tavern, its open-bottom story stabling several horses. A decrepit wagon sat in the yard while someone worked in the rain to repair it. Willow walked faster, heading toward the welcome shelter. Rule poked his head out of Willow's pocket, and friend Jean peered from his perch under Elora Danon's pack as they felt Willow change direction. "We are not going in there," friend Jean said. "Elora needs fresh milk," Willow answered firmly. He ducked into the stable and dashed toward the stairs that led up to the inn. "You're not in command here, Shorty," friend Jean barked. "I am. We are not going inside, and that's an order. You hear me?" Willow didn't answer as he climbed the stairs. A minstrel's music greeted his ears when he entered the tavern's main room and stopped to look around. The place was packed with Daikini travelers waiting out the rain. Nomad families, mothers with babies, local drunkards, and what looked to Willow like cutthroats and thieves of all kinds mingled in wary coexistence. As he watched, 2 purrs crashed down from a balcony, fighting tooth and nail. Mustering his courage, Willow raised his voice and called, "Could you spare some milk for this poor hungry baby?" "Get out of here, Peck," someone shouted. People began to pitch things at him, yelling, "Beat it, Peck! Stick him on a spit! Cook him!" Willow ran to the stairwell and took cover. Friend Jean poked his head out from beneath the pack and lowered himself precariously toward Willow's pocket, just as Rule began to climb out, his eye on a pretty barmaid. "Look at her," he said. "Give me that dust of broken heart, friend Jean." "No," friend Jean clutched the pouch. "You can't have it." Rule grabbed it away from him and pitched backward out of the pocket. He landed beside a large striped cat, and dust spilled into his eyes. Stunned, Rule rubbed his eyes. He blinked them open and grinned amorously at the cat. "You are so beautiful," he murmured. He flung his arms around the cat and kissed it. The cat hissed and yowled, flailing at him with its claws. Rule leaped back in terror and tumbled headfirst into a vat of beer. Willow ignored him, having more important concerns on his mind. Elora Danon whimpered with hunger as he looked around the room. At last, Willow spotted a pail of milk on the floor next to a nomad family. "I could use your help, friend Jean," he said. He felt his pocket twitch and looked down. Friend Jean cowered inside it. Willow sighed and put his finger into Elora Danon's mouth for a pacifier, quieting her as he began to edge toward the milk. "Willow?" friend Jean's muffled voice called. "Shh, quiet," Willow muttered and slapped his pocket. Stretching out his arm, he dipped a cloth in the bucket of milk. Nearby, an ugly little Daikini boy made a face at him. Frowning, Willow took the soaked cloth and hurried back under the stairs to feed Elora Danon. The boy followed him. As Elora Danon sucked hungrily on the cloth, the boy suddenly poked his head around the stairs and glared at Willow. Willow leaped back against the wall with a startled cry. The bottom plank of the wall gave way. He fell through into the room beyond. As Willow tumbled into the room, he saw 2 women getting dressed in a panic. "Hurry, hurry!" The prettier of the 2 gasped. "He's coming!" She peered out the window. The other woman wore a kerchief over her hair. Powder rose in clouds as she patted thick makeup onto her face. "How do I look?" she asked gruffly. Willow froze at the sound. He'd know that voice anywhere. It was Mad Mardigan. "Not you!" he cried before he could stop himself. Mad Mardigan spun around and stared at him. "Where the devil did you come from?" "I knew I shouldn't have trusted you," Willow said angrily. Friend Jean peeked out of his pocket. "You're crawling with brownies," Mad Mardigan observed. The pretty woman shrieked, "I hate brownies!" Just then, the bedroom door slammed open and someone stormed in. Someone big, half-drunk, and mean-looking. "Where is he?" he roared. Mad Mardigan wrapped a muffler hastily around his throat while the woman curtsied to the stranger. "There's nobody here except me and my, cousin," she turned to Mad Mardigan. "Hilda, this is my husband Lug." "Hilda," Willow said louder than he needed to. Lug shoved his wife aside and glared at Mad Mardigan. Mad Mardigan batted his heavily made-up eyes and giggled. "How do you do?" Lug sniffed at him, smelling perfume, and ogled his well-padded chest. When he put a hand to test its authenticity, Mad Mardigan ducked away and snatched the baby from Willow's arms. "Hey," Willow shouted, "give her back." Madmartigan tisked and shook his head. These pecks make terrible nursemaids. Nursemaid, Willow said even louder. He began to leap at Madmartigan, trying to reach Elora Danon. They get too excited, Madmartigan batted him aside with one large hand, hugging the baby to his chest. From the corner of the room came a loud burp. Excuse me, Rule said, dripping beer. Are we having a party? Willow scooped him up and stuffed him into a pocket, muffling Rule's hiccups. Lug trailed Madmartigan around the room, finally cornering him by the door. "Wanna breed?" he leered. "No, thank you," Madmartigan murmured. Time to leave. He jerked open the door and ran out. He didn't get far. Willow watched as several Nockmar soldiers met him head-on and herded him back into the room. The soldiers dragged Madmartigan, Willow, and Lug and his wife out into the main room. Other soldiers stormed through the tavern, grabbing babies from frightened mothers and inspecting them. The brownies squabbled loudly in Willow's pocket as a tall woman in armor strode up to them. It was Sorsha, Bevmorda's daughter. "You," she pointed at Madmartigan, "are you the mother of that child?" Worried more about Lug standing beside him than anything else at the moment, Madmartigan nodded. Yes, of course." "Let me see it," Sorsha ordered. "No," Willow cried. "Don't let her." Sorsha shoved him aside with her boot. "I gave you an order, woman." She grabbed at the baby. Madmartigan elbowed her away, knocking her off balance. The soldiers reached for their swords as the lieutenant pointed a dagger at Madmartigan's throat. Sorsha drove her own sword into the floor like a spike and pulled off her helmet. Her long, wild red hair tumbled down over her shoulders. Stunned by her unexpected beauty, Madmartigan stared. "By glory, you're beautiful," he said, barely remembering to keep his voice high. "And you're very strong," Sorsha answered, with a startled, then suspicious look. "Thank you," Madmartigan whispered, glancing down. Sorsha peered at him and frowned. Suddenly, she ripped away his kerchief and muffler. "You're no woman," she snapped. "Not a woman?" Lug snarled. Madmartigan grinned guiltily. "Gentlemen, meet Lug." He ducked just as Lug lunged at him. The fists that had been meant for his own face connected with Sorsha's lieutenant instead. Madmartigan dashed to the window with the baby under his arm. He knocked Sorsha aside and leaped out of it as Lug and the lieutenant crashed to the floor, grappling. Seizing the opportunity, the other tavern patrons stampeded in all directions, looking for a way out. Willow dove out the window, following Madmartigan, as a furious Sorsha ordered her soldiers after them. Chapter 8. Madmartigan grabbed hold of a dangling rope as he pitched out the second-story window. He swung down from the balcony into the decrepit wagon sitting in the yard below. Settling the baby beside him, he grabbed up the horse's reins and drove away. "Madmartigan, wait!" Willow shouted. He ran frantically along the tavern balcony and leaped, closing his eyes as Madmartigan rattled past below. With brownies spilling from his pockets, he landed on the sacks in the back of the wagon. Madmartigan tore out of the yard as if the devil was on his tail, leaving soldiers in the mud and chaos behind him. The wagon swerved and fishtailed down the muddy road. Frangine and Rule clung to each other desperately to keep from being tossed out. Willow huddled under the seat, bumping his head as he settled Elora Danon into a storage box packed with straw. "Stop!" he shouted at Madmartigan. "Slow down! Stop!" But Madmartigan yelled and slapped the reins, since he saw 3 Nockmar horsemen and a war chariot closing in on him. The panic-stricken cart horse galloped even faster, but 2 of the soldiers soon pulled even with him. One soldier leapt into the wagon, the other took aim at Madmartigan with his bow. "Stop this wagon, Madmartigan!" Willow shouted again, not able to see what was going on up above. "You're going to get us killed!" Madmartigan watched as the archer took aim at him. Letting go of the reins at the last second, Madmartigan pitched backwards into the wagon bed. The arrow meant for him struck the Nockmar minion behind him. Before Madmartigan could reach the reins, yet another Nockmar soldier leaped from his horse into the wagon to attack. They struggled together as the jouncing, driverless wagon sped on. Willow climbed out from under the seat and tried to reach the dangling reins. The wagon hit a tree root and bucked him forward into the harness. Willow clung there desperately, suspended above the flashing hooves and the road. With a strength he didn't know he had, he held on and inched his way slowly and painfully back onto the wagon seat. Madmartigan finally managed to hurl the soldier he'd been fighting off the back of the wagon. Willow gasped with relief, but the chariot was still on their trail. Its driver held the reins between his clenched teeth as he raised his arm to hurl a deadly bolo blade. Willow grabbed the reins and jerked hard on them, stopping the wagon short. The chariot shot by. Its driver caught off guard. Willow dove under the seat to see to the baby. "What are you doing?" Madmartigan yelled. "Are you crazy?" The chariot did a U-turn in the road and started back for them. "You can't chase around with Allura like this," Willow shouted. "We are getting off." Madmartigan grabbed the reins from his hand and drove the horse forward again, tumbling Willow into the back of the wagon. Yelling wildly, he sent the wagon straight at the chariot. "Madmartigan, I mean it," Willow gasped furiously. "I don't want to have to hurt you." Madmartigan drove on, still on a collision course, as if there was no one else in the wagon or on the road ahead. At the last second, the chariot driver's nerve broke and he veered aside. Madmartigan whacked him with a spear as he hurtled by. The chariot toppled over and crashed into a tree. Madmartigan pulled the lathered horse to a halt at last. "Now we stop, Beck," he panted. Willow pulled the crying baby out from under the seat and jumped to the ground with her. The brownies hopped down behind him. "What a stupid daikini," Frangine grumbled, shaking himself out. "You never, ever drive that fast with an infant," Willow shouted. Madmartigan frowned, waving his hand. "I just saved that infant's life." He whacked the horse on its flank, sending the wagon on down the road. Then he turned, hustled Willow into the ditch at the roadside, and made him lie flat. Frangine leaped up after them when he heard the sound of hoofbeats. Up above, Rule still stood in the stupor on the road. "Where am I?" he groaned. Sorsha and her troops thundered past, and Rule tumbled into the ditch beside them. When the riders were gone, Willow raised his head. "I knew we shouldn't have trusted you." He looked at Madmartigan, remembering the argument that they had begun before all of this happened. "You swore on your word of honor you'd look after Allura Dannon." "I did," Madmartigan said defensively. He climbed to his feet, not meeting Willow's eyes. "But I was attacked by a huge, hairy, vicious, smelly cyclops." "I am not smelly," Frangine shrieked. Rule nodded tipsily. "Frangine stole the baby while you were taking a—" "Get out of here," Madmartigan stamped his foot, and the drunken brownie toppled over. "You're no man of honor," Willow said bitterly. Madmartigan looked back at him. "I was once the greatest knight in the kingdom of Galadorn," he muttered. He picked up a stick and thrust it, parried it like a sword, but his balance was off, and the stick went flying. Willow watched him in disgust. "You're reckless," he said. Frangine helped Rule to his feet. "And irresponsible," he added. "And dangerous," Rule gasped. "I declare we execute him." Frangine raised his tiny sword. "I don't need this." Madmartigan waved a hand at them all in disgust. "I'm on my way. I gotta find some people my own size." He glanced at the baby with a wry, fleeting smile. "Goodbye, Skinny." "She's not skinny," Willow snapped. Madmartigan looked pained. "Look at her arms. They look like a couple of sticks. He's not feeding you enough, is he?" He tickled the baby, and she giggled. Then he blew her a kiss and started away. As he climbed the hillside, dogs howled in the distance. Madmartigan stopped, glancing back. "You better clear out, Willow, before those troops come back," he called. Holding the baby, Willow watched Madmartigan go on his way with a sudden sinking feeling. Rule hiccuped and fell on his face. "Stand up straight," Frangine hissed. "We are an army." "We don't need him, Allura," Willow murmured, still watching the daikini grow smaller in the distance. Allura Dannon began to cry. Willow stood where he was a moment longer, undecided. Then, "Wait, Madmartigan," he shouted, and began to run up the hill. He struggled through the tall grass, making all the speed he could, with Rule and Frangine following behind. Madmartigan kept walking without looking back. "Go home, Willow," he said wearily. "I thought you didn't trust me." "I don't," Willow panted as he came up alongside. "But we need your help." "My help?" Madmartigan grimaced. "A great sorcerer like you? What do you need my help for?" "You're a warrior and a swordsman, and you're 10 times bigger than I am, stupid!" Willow shouted, exasperated. Madmartigan glanced down at him. "Are you trying to make my life more difficult than it is?" he asked bleakly. In the distance, dogs bayed again, and soldiers shouted. Madmartigan threw himself down in the weeds. Willow crouched down beside him. "Look," he said, "I'm sorry I got angry." Now that he had time to think about it, he realized that Madmartigan's courage and skill really had saved them all. "We wouldn't have escaped without you." Madmartigan looked back at him, then squinted at the baby. He scratched her head with a friendly hand as if she were a puppy. But he only said, "Yeah, well, don't expect me to help you again," and looked away. When the sound of dogs and soldiers faded into the distance, they got to their feet and began to walk in silence. "This way." Rule staggered in a circle, pointing wildly at the sky. "We go beyond that hill to the lake," Franjean commanded, jerking Rule around. "Aw, no." Madmartigan struck his forehead in mock despair as he strode along beside Willow. "That's where I'm going." Lengthening his stride as if he had made a decision, he swaggered past Willow to take the lead. All right, he nodded. "You can stick with me as far as the lake, but that's it. You're not going south, I hope." "No," Willow answered, trying to disguise his relief, "just as far as the lake." "Good." Madmartigan glanced down at the brownies and waved his hands. "Mumbo, Jumbo, I'm hungry. Go find me some eggs or something." The two tiny warriors scurried away, Franjean pausing only long enough to turn back and shout, "We are not afraid of you." Madmartigan grunted and turned back to Willow. Ungrateful little creatures. They walked on. Far away in Nockmar Castle, Queen Bavmordig paced anxiously with her druids. She looked up as General Kale entered the echoing throne room, followed by 2 soldiers. "Kale," she snapped, "have you found the child?" He bowed his head. "The search goes on, my queen." She frowned, clenching her hands. "Why, with all my power, with the strength of my great army, can you not find this little child?" she demanded. Kale hunched his shoulders. "We search even now," he murmured. "It won't be long." Bavmorda's frown only deepened. "Find the child," she shrieked. "Find the child. Time is running out." Kale backed away from her presence and hurried off. Chapter 9. The brownies slept restlessly beside the campfire. Madmartigan sat ripping apart his female clothes, reshaping them into something more suited to a fighting man. As he worked, he watched Willow check Alora Dannon, who lay sleeping. "She's kind of cute when she's asleep. She's really a princess, you know." Willow glanced up at him, wanting to explain why her safety was so important. "And you're a great sorcerer, and I'm the King of Kashmir," said Madmartigan scornfully. "Go to sleep." He lay down and turned his back on them, shutting his eyes. "Good night, Madmartigan," Willow sighed, still not sure what to make of his reluctant traveling companion, or if they could really count on him. When he thought Madmartigan must be asleep, he pulled Shalandria's wand carefully from his pack. If only he could master this wand, his own magic could protect them. Unable to resist, he shook it lightly, whispering, "Tuatha, Lakathok, Tuatha." Out of nowhere, a bolt of lightning exploded around him, flinging him into the air. Madmartigan sat up, shaking his head. "Willow?" he called. "Willow?" He looked up. Willow hung in the branches of a tree over his head. "Oh," he mumbled foggily, "there you are. Good night, Willow." He lay down and went back to sleep. They traveled on the next morning, walking for a good part of the day without seeing anyone or anything that looked dangerous. At midday, they stopped to eat below a roaring waterfall, the most splendid sight Willow had yet seen in his journey. He turned away from it reluctantly and saw Madmartigan holding the baby on his lap. The Daikini was letting her suck on a wild root. "What are you doing?" Willow demanded. Madmartigan shrugged. "I found some blackroot. She loves it." "Blackroot?" Willow cried, leaping up. "I am the father of 2 children. You never, ever give a baby blackroot." "My mother raised us on blackroot," Madmartigan said. "Puts hair on your chest, right, Styx?" He took a generous bite from the root to prove that it was harmless. "Her name is not Styx," Willow said, not even sure himself why the sight of Madmartigan holding the baby upset him so. "She is Alora Dannon, the future empress of all kingdoms, and the last thing she's going to want is a hairy chest." He snatched the blackroot from Madmartigan's hand and flung it away. They continued their journey in silence. At last, Franjean and Rule stopped on a hill overlooking a large lake. "There's the island," Rule called. "We made it. Willow exclaimed, hardly believing his eyes. "We'll get a boat in that village," Franjean pointed down the hill. Cautiously, they began to descend the steep slope. When they reached the outskirts of the village, they slowed and their faces fell. 6 decrepit huts sat rotting on the edge of the lake. The village had obviously been abandoned long ago. The travelers walking down its eerie, silent street, silent themselves with grim disappointment. All except Mad Mardigan. "Well, looks like I got you here," he said cheerfully, scrounging through the rubbish for anything that might still be valuable. "You?" Franjean piped indignantly. "What did you do, you stupid daikini? All you did was hang around and eat our eggs." "And eat, and eat, and eat, and eat, and eat," Rule added. Mad Mardigan frowned. "I'll eat you, you little—" He swiped at them. Franjean leaped out of his way, clambering up the side of a ruined hut. "Daikini, dog," he spat. "Yeah," Rule echoed, peering out from behind a hut. "Daikini, dog." Willow walked along the shore, ignoring the noisy argument as he searched for something they could use to get them to the island. At last he found a small boat that still looked sound, even after years of waiting for an owner who had never returned. "I found a boat," he called. "We're all set." He laid Elora Danan down on the shore. "Good," Mad Mardigan said, following the 2 brownies down to the boat. "Take these 2 lizards out and drown 'em." He knelt by the baby. "Goodbye, Sticks," he said gently. He got to his feet and started to walk away. "Mad Mardigan," Willow called. Mad Mardigan spun around. "What?" he shouted. "Thanks," Willow said. Mad Mardigan shrugged, waved, and went on his way. "I'm going to miss him," Rule said sadly. "Me too," Franjean nodded. "I enjoyed humiliating him." Willow began to push the boat down toward the lake. "What are you doing?" a voice asked. Willow looked up, startled. A golden-haired boy stood waist-deep in the water in front of him. Franjean and Rule rushed to the baby's side, brandishing their spears. "I'm borrowing this boat to go out to that island," Willow said uncertainly to the boy. "The island is cursed," the boy warned. "Don't go out there." "Cursed?" Willow repeated. "Beware of the lake," the boy said. "Queen Bavmorda's powers control the elements here." He dove back under the water and disappeared. "Shalendria said nothing about a curse," Rule murmured. "I don't think we should go out there," Willow shook his head. Franjean elbowed Rule aside. "That was just an odd boy. Pay him no mind. Finrazel is a most powerful sorceress. You must take this wand to her." "She will save us," Rule agreed. "I don't want to take Elora out there," Willow said. "You're right," Franjean nodded eagerly. "Leave her on shore." "Oh yes," Rule chimed in. "We will stay here with her." Willow looked out at the island again, frowning with worry. At last he sighed and nodded. Willow carried Elora Danan to the hut and settled her inside it. "It's all right, Elora," he said. "Go to sleep. Nobody will find you here. I'll be back with Finrazel very soon." The 2 brownies waved their spears. "We will guard her with our meager lives," Franjean said. They snapped to attention like soldiers. Willow kissed the baby and left the hut. As he rowed the boat across the gray lake toward the island, he was more worried about leaving Elora Danan behind than what he was about to find ahead of him. At last he reached the island and pulled his boat ashore near the scattered remains of a skeleton. "Rizel?" he called nervously. "Hello? Finrazel?" He walked forward under a large tree.
"What are you doing here?"
a high-pitched voice demanded.
"Get away!"
Willow looked up. A furry creature looking something like a small possum scuttled down the tree to snarl viciously at him.
"Go back,"
it said.
"Who are you?"
"I'm Willow Offgood," Willow answered, hardly surprised at all to be having a conversation with a possum. "I'm here to find the great sorceress Finrazel."
"That's me,"
the creature exclaimed.
"I'm Razel."
Willow shook his head. "This can't be right," he said.
"One of Bavmorda's spells transformed me,"
she snapped impatiently. Willow shrugged, thinking that this made as much sense as anything else. "Well, this wand is for you. It's from Shalendria." He held it out. Rizel sprang onto his chest.
"Shalendria,"
she cried.
"the prophecy was true then. The princess has been born."
"Yes," Willow said, "and she needs you." A flock of birds rose from the tree, screeching, and flew off into the suddenly darkening sky. The wind began to rise, howling angrily.
"I Hide the wand.
Roselle commanded.
Bavmortar knows your presence here.
Willow gasped, turning back. What about Alora Dannon?
Hurry!
Roselle ordered.
Get in the boat. We must leave this island right now.
Willow got them back into the water as quickly as he could. The waves tossed the small boat like a cork as the storm grew worse, and he clutched Roselle tightly against his chest to keep her safe. Suddenly, she pointed a claw at the bow. He turned and saw a hand appear, and then a face. The golden-haired boy he'd seen on the shore began to climb into the boat.
Kill him!
Roselle cried. No, Willow said, shocked.
Kill him!
She insisted. Willow hesitated a moment more, then grabbed up his oar and smashed the boy back into the lake. The boy surfaced again near the boat, leaping like a dolphin. His form began to change, becoming fish-like as he dove and vanished again. He rose up once more, this time with monstrous jaws gaping. Willow bashed the fish beast with the oar, and it pulled away again, with fishing nets trailing from its jaws. Too late, Willow felt his feet jerk out from under him as the nets tangled around his ankles. He was dragged overboard and into the water. Willow swirled along in the buffeting wake of the monster, struggling until he could cut himself free with his dagger. He kicked his way to the surface and swam frantically back toward the pitching boat. He heard a roar as the monster surfaced and lunged after him.
Hurry, Willow!
Roselle cried.
Hurry!
Willow scrambled on board, gasping. The monster crunched wood behind him and drew back for another try. Willow dug into his pocket, pulling out a magic acorn, and dropped it. He fumbled desperately in the bottom of the leaking boat, found it again, and stood up, just as the monster's jaws opened, ready to swallow him down. He hurled the acorn into its gaping mouth. The monster turned to stone before his eyes and sank beneath the waves.